We have another
Thank
10
you,
minutes to
tremendous.
wrap up this morning before we go upstairs and view the joint session of Congress. But I think before we talk about the main topics of this morning, after what we heard from Rusty, is there anybody else who just wants to jump in and has a personal note, a personal story to share?
Within reason.
What NATO means to you, or actually what NATO means to me?
Please, at the back here. Could we have some more lights up, Sharon, please? There is a lady at the back. Follow me, and I will take you to her. She's here in the
Follow
shadow.
Nick to
Good
the
morning.
light.
I'm Clara Jordan. I'm a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. I also work for an organization called Global Cyber Alliance, and I'm also a fellow Slovak. And I'll just tell my story. You know, my parents share the story of the former ambassador at NATO Slovakia. I have a story that I came to educational system where the borders were open. And I went to study to France and to Netherlands, and I started my career at NATO, and I ended up in Washington, D.C., and I worked at the Atlantic Council. But what really scares me is that when I look back, there is a generation that forgets that what we have now was not, given to our parents or the previous generation. So, my message is,
what can we do about that? How can we keep the story, your story,
I mean,
the story of so many people in this world alive?
I think it's really to talk about what we would have missed out had we not had these opportunities. That I couldn't go and study. I mean, my parents almost went to jail because they were listening to Beatles. I mean, those are real stories, right?
Thank you.
And so,
what would we have missed out? Anybody else who wants to jump in there? I think that's a very valuable point. Back there, sir.
Microphone here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mircea Joanna. I used to be foreign minister of Romania 15 years ago yesterday when my country's flag was raised at the NATO headquarters. And I'd like to say just one word about the huge transformative force that NATO enlargement, and this is not only about security. This is far deeper. It's about the very essence of our societies. It's that kind of transformative force that made 100 million Eastern Europeans, former communist country, prisoners. We are in open-air jails in our countries. I think the ones who had the luxury of being inside NATO for more decades than we have been are not, the younger ones are not appreciating enough what freedom, what democracy, what transforming our military and our intelligence services with the heavy burden of the forma securitate in my country. This is something that we have not the right to abandon. This is the essence of what we want to be. This is the essence of what our children and grandchildren we would love to see what kind of society would be. So this is not a technical thing. This is not even a defense thing. This is not even an Article 5 thing. This is not about President Trump or Secretary General that will be, I'm happy to see him speaking in front of the US Congress. This is about who we are. And more important, who we want to remain and stay in the future. This is about democracy and freedom, my friends. This is what we should defend together.
Give him a hand. This is about who we are. Thank you so much indeed. Anybody else? This is a moment, I think, of sharing emotions. Ma'am.
Laura Kennedy, now with Foreign Policy for America. But as I mentioned earlier, I'm a career, or was a career U.S. Diplomat. And I remember on September 11th, I was in what we call jokingly charm school to prepare to go out for my first ambassadorial assignment. So we had the screens on, saw the planes hit in New York. There were reports that the State Department had been hit. My family was frantically calling me. Much of my family is from New York, so we had that trauma. And then it will never, ever leave me the fact that NATO came, to the U.S. defense immediately for this transformative, sadly, effect for the U.S. Then when I went out to my first ambassadorship in Turkmenistan, which is a neutral state, but obviously bordering Afghanistan, NATO reps were calling me constantly in terms of what can we do to get supplies into Afghanistan and so on. So I will never, as an American, forget what NATO did for the United States in its time of need. So thank you, NATO.
Thank
and
you
happy
very,
birthday.
very much. It's not about the Eastern European countries, it's also about this very country. Thank you. Nick, hard cut, what is the main thing you take away from this morning?
I'm just going to give you 3 or 4 personal reflections. I was very struck by what Rose Gottemoeller said about NATO not engaging in an arms race. The fact is that it's about defense and deterrence. But she then used a fascinating description of what it can be like behind closed doors in NATO. She says it's knockdown, drag-out fights at NATO headquarters, shouting matches as well. So that's indicative of what we don't see in the tensions that there are within the alliance. I was also very struck by the Turkish foreign minister when pushed that Turkey does not know what US policy is in Syria. He also made it very clear that Turkey can buy any system, including the S-400. That's a bilateral issue. Thirdly, I was very struck in the technology discussion about how far behind NATO is on this, and we heard that from the commander from Transformation. But he said very clearly, what I need to do is get rid of all my staff officers, or a good number of them. What I need to do is recruit the next generation, like my grandchildren, because they are the people who will understand the kind of adversary we're up against. And I was very struck again in the last session by the fact that it's clear that technology and the technologists are driving procurement as opposed to the defense needs and defense demands. And that's an inversion. That's a somersaulting of the normal assumptions. But everything we've heard this morning so far, and we're only halfway through the day, has been about the speed and the enormity of change. And the question remains what we posed at 9:05. How rapidly can NATO adjust, both the nation states, but also NATO as an alliance? And that's what we're going to hear, I hope, from the Secretary General and others this afternoon after you return from your buffet lunch on the first floor.
I think we have a couple of minutes. Here are sitting the youngsters. How do you lead NATO into the future, sir? You personally?
Me personally.
You're being appointed now.
I mean, I think that Will said in the technology panel is right. You have to give us the opportunities to lead, to address the problems directly. And, you know, if you give my generation the chance, you know, we have demonstrated that we have the ability to lead, and we just need that opportunity to lead in the future.
Maybe you pass the mic on to the very eager. Anybody else? Young by passport or
You don't
young
have
by
to have
heart?
a dark suit to qualify to
please.
speak here. Anyone can speak. Please. Next gen is especially important. Remember what we said right at the beginning. There are large numbers out there who are watching who are from the next generation. This is about the public out there and what they're taking away from NATO now.
No.
Hi, my name is Kara Hernandez. I'm kind of like a consultant. We've been working in Central America for the past couple of years. And I do think it's really interesting as NATO starts engaging with Latin America, starting with Colombia, how they can start engaging with other countries in that region because it's very similar threats. You know, we have to think about Russia and we have to think about North Korea and Iran. And I just think it will be very interesting to see how NATO continues those partnerships.
Thank you. One more, lady.
Don't apologize.
I was just going to say 2 things. One, I think it's very important to remind my generation of the importance of the peacefulness of society that we live. I've never had any similar hardship to, for example, my dad growing up in Spain with Franco. And I can understand it rationally, but I will never really know what it was like. So I think it's very important to remind us. And then as youngsters, if you give us the opportunity to lead, as my colleague said, you have to recognize that many times our ideas are not narrowed down by experience. So sometimes things we may suggest may seem really out of the realm of possibility, but I think that's exactly what we bring to the table. We bring new ideas, different perspectives that are not narrowed down by our experiences and what may or may not be able to be possible, and that's the value of what we add.
Thank you so much.
Can I keep the microphone one moment? Do you think your generation, you've got the microphone, you happen to be standing up, but there's a level of adversity which is looming, and there are a number of threats which are clearly on the agenda. which on balance the public either don't want to listen to or just don't want to know about. But whether it be Russia or China or cyber, there are levels of insecurity coming down the track, not in 50 years, but maybe 50 days, which your generation probably doesn't have an understanding of. There are many who say that where we are at the moment, it could be worse than the Cold War. But you don't remember the Cold War because you weren't around.
Right, but you hadn't lived through a period that was similar to the Cold War before either, and you were able to adapt. Many people lived through the First World War and then to the Second, but many people grew up just with what the Second World War was. And I think it's an extraordinary adaptation of society that we were able to overcome these issues, and specifically in the case of the United States, for example, overcome the Cold War, not cause massive nuclear warfare, and then come out on top and lead the world in the way that it has. So I think it comes down to opportunities and to giving the right people the right opportunities, and letting us fail sometimes and make some mistakes.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. It's always the biggest challenge, isn't it? Now let's go upstairs for the live viewing of the joint session of Congress together, and we have to be back sharp. And
please come back on time.
Yes,
before 1 o'clock.
Thank you very much.